I have not done this in a couple of months. I missed you guys a lot. But enough of the sentimental stuff. Let's talk about church scams. Let's face it, we live in a generation where prosperity gospel has taken over and churches have become, for the most part, these money-making machines or businesses, if you want to put it bluntly. And this has led to the advent of church scams, which, if you think about, is kind of an offshoot of human greed. And at least once a year, you hear about one church scam that just blows your mind. But what if I told you that about 44 years ago, there was one particular church scam that led to the death of 909 people in a single day, all because of one man?
Town. The Associated Press reports the troops have said nothing about reports of mass suicides in the commune.
My people, this is absolutely not the video I was going to make, but I just had to. So let's talk about the man named Jim Jones.
Bootstraps, and you can become your god, not in condescension.
Now, I will get to Jim Jones in a second, but if you're seeing me for the first time, hi, my name is John Andrew. I make videos explaining things I'm generally interested in. Doesn't really dumb it down to a particular thing, but just things that interest me. If that interests you, and I hope it does, please do like this video and subscribe to the channel for more of this kind of random stuff. Okay, now I got that out of the way. Very good. So we need to establish the psychology behind these church scams, and it might lighten your perception on the things that actually do happen. So let's take a layman, let's call him Tom. Now Tom craves a sense of belonging, as do we all as human beings living on this earth. We all want to fit in some capacity. So Tom somehow finds a few people that he can relate to and gel with. In the course of Tom establishing a relationship with these people, one of the activities they indulge in is going to church regularly. So our layman Tom enters church, and then he listens to the pastor's message and it resonates with him. And because this message has resonated with Tom so much, he decides to stay. He starts to make friends and he becomes a part of the congregation of this church. And at the very base level, this is how a lot of people have ended up in the churches they are in, or the religious gatherings within which they find themselves. So what happens when things start to go a little too far? Well, here's what I like to call the Messiah complex. Now, what tends to happen is the congregants start to hold the pastor or whoever is leading this congregation with such reverence. And this is where you start to hear certain terms of endearment like papa, daddy, that second word. A lot of words have double meanings in 2022. So okay. Let me just you get the point. And largely because his direction has led them into good places in their lives where they feel confident in the fact that their association with this church is bringing them success in their personal lives. Now, a lot of what happens on the other side of this double-edged sword is how this figure would react to this. If you're fortunate enough to find yourself in a congregation of level-headed people and a level-headed leader, you wouldn't be subjected to, having to do some erroneous things. However, when there is an ulterior motive, that's where the problems really start. And in these cases, the leader will start to impose their beliefs on certain social issues or just personal beliefs about anything that goes on in the world. They start to make certain interesting demands, which I won't dive into. We will get to that eventually. Things just don't seem to make the base level of sense, as you would put it. And at that point, literally anything is possible. Believe me, the human mind is more fragile than we would like to think. So now that we've established the psychology, let's talk about our main character, Jim Jones. So Jim was born in a town called Crete in the state of Indiana in the US in 1931. This is about 3 years after the Great Depression in the US, which I'm kind of hoping we are not having our version of over here. And those times were brutal. A lot of people had to resort to farming in order to get something to put on the table. So as Jim starts to grow up, and with the influences that are gradually being established around him, he starts to imitate these pastors, much to the dismay of his own mother. And as he's growing into adulthood, he starts to study these figures in world history like Joseph Stalin, Mahatma Gandhi, Mao Zedong, Karl Marx, and Hitler. Anyway, he would get married to a woman named Marceline Baldwin in 1949. Now, Jim seemingly had certain influences as well from certain experiences that he had gone through, like racism. And this was a time in the US where the civil rights movement was starting to catch up slowly in building traction. Fast forward to 1952, and early in the year, he decides he wants to become a Methodist minister. So in the summer, he starts out as a student pastor. Also, just during this day, he was kicked out of this church because he stole church funds, but later he said that it was because they didn't want to racially integrate people, so, you know. Anyway, within this time in 1953, he goes up to this church convention in Columbus, Ohio. And over there, he receives this prophecy from a woman who's saying he has a great ministry that will contribute to the body of Christ. So he seems taken aback, but then he later preaches at that same convention, a student pastor. So mind you, in this time, the Church of Pentecost is undergoing what was being called a healing revival movement. This was the point in time where so many preachers were starting to do these theatrical laying of hands and healing people in front of large groups of people just so they could attract people to come to their churches and in the process generate more money for the church. So in 1953, he goes to a church called the Laurel Street Tabernacle in Indianapolis, Indiana, and he starts attending, then starts preaching over there. And for the next 2 years, whilst preaching there, he would also be traveling, speaking in other churches, doing what a lot of pastors would usually do. But he had this impending problem that was on the way. You see, the Pentecostal Assemblies of God Church at this point in time was not entirely in support of this healing revival stuff, so they sent a replacement pastor to this Laurel Street Tabernacle to replace him and further enforce their will to not have these theatrical healing sessions in their churches because they felt it was desecrating the word of God. Now, seeing as he's been kicked out of this church he was at, he starts his own church and he calls it the Wings of Healing. Now, it is this Wings of Healing church that would later come to be known as the People's Temple. And he started with 20 members, which would seem very small, but wherever one or two are gathered, the Lord is there. Amen. But there was a problem. He didn't have any money. 20 people just couldn't support him financially. So he had to start thinking out of the box to some extent. So shortly after this, Jim Jones starts to align himself with this group called the Independent Assemblies of God. These people split from the main Pentecostal Assemblies of God because they were more pro-healing, revival people. Then he associates himself with a man named William Branham.
And a strange gene somewhere in your neck has caused a cancer to come into your neck.
Now, William Branham had a very interesting tactic, which I'm sure has become very popular these days, but he would see someone, tell them their name, tell them their address, tell them why they were there, and then he would tell them, oh, yeah, you are healed. And then, everybody would be mind blown. And this intrigued Jim Jones so much, so he started imitating it to some degree. And then one day they hold this joint service campaign convention sort of thing. About 11,000 people join. But through his association with William Branham and Branham endorsing Jim Jones, Jim Jones's congregation rises from this 20 people congregation to well over 1,000 on a regular basis. And this seemingly starts to get into his head, so he starts proclaiming himself as the second coming or reincarnation of the prophet Elijah. He also started looking at this man called Father Divine. Father Divine was based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and Jim Jones would start to study this man because this man used to do certain things to foster a sense of community amongst his church members. One of these things was soup kitchens. So Jim Jones actually went to Father Divine's place twice just to, kind of get a sense of what the man was doing. And then he takes a lot of what Father Divine is doing and starts to do the same thing with his own church. And this is actually what starts to allow him to get into the personal lives and sort of start taking control over the members of his congregation at the time. So in 1961, Mr. Jones starts claiming that he's had a vision of a nuclear attack that would completely destroy the city of Indianapolis, where the People's Temple was based, and so they had to move. Just around the same time, Marceline, his wife, is starting to confide in people, telling them that she is not in support of what he's doing. She's basically a little freaked out by everything that he's doing with all these visions of a nuclear attack and all of that stuff. In 1962, he starts looking for different places where the temple could move to, and then he stumbles on Guyana as he's heading to Brazil, and he starts to notice certain things about the place, like how it has a socialist government, how the people spoke English, so that was definitely a plus for them, and how they took to his message, even though he was a little careful not to bring up the whole, communist socialist thing that he had come to be known for slowly. Eventually, he and his family moved down to Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, and they sort of blend in with the people. They start to farm with them on their pangeros, I believe, if that's the word. I'm sure I got it wrong. But anyway, in 1963, his assistant pastor tells him he has to come back because there are problems going on within the People's Temple in Indianapolis. And he gets back and realizes that his congregation of well over 1,000 people has dwindled to less than 100 members. He goes on the circuits again, preaching, traveling, trying to amass a following for his People's Temple again. And then the following year, in 1964, he convinces about 140 of his members to join him to go to Redwood Valley in California to move the People's Temple over there. His assistant pastor at the time was a man named Russell Winberg, who convinced people not to follow Jim to California because he believed that they were moving away from Christianity, and he was able to convince some people to stay, but these 140 people followed Jim to start in California. Now his next tactics were simple: amass more members. And how would he do this? He became a teacher at a local adult education school, and in the course of his lectures he would start to introduce them to the teachings that he was introducing or giving to the people at the People's Temple. And this, to his credit, really worked for him, because at some point he was even planting people from the People's Temple into his classes to further facilitate that sense of, we welcome you, just join us. So he was gathering that following very quickly. And not only that, but he would actually start to take members from other churches by attacking the teachings of the church within which those people defected to come to his. One notable incident happened in a San Francisco missionary Baptist church where he claimed he could heal a man who was dealing with cancer, and he claimed to pull the cancer out of the man's body, which it was chicken. But yes, after this healing session, he starts to lambast the teachings of the Baptist church, and to his credit, he takes about 200 people from that particular church. So regardless of whether he was taking one person, 2 people, 22 people, 200 people, he was still taking people and amassing them and bringing them into his following. So now we come to May 1977, and at this point, Jim Jones is terrified of the fact that there might be a government raid because of the activities in his church, and not just the fake healings, but there were other things going on that I'll leave a link, you can go and check those things out. But because of that, he had to leave, and so he found a way to convince 600 of his following to come with him to Jamestown in Guyana.
The clump of trees in the center of the clearing is a 5-acre pig pasture. The large grassy area at the top is the 40-acre cow pasture, which is planted in grass. I would like to say at this time that all of this was made possible by our leader, Father Jones.
This place had taken about 3 years to build. They had cleared out land for farming, shacks, bungalows, built the whole thing from scratch in the middle of the Guyanese jungle. So he moves to Jonestown in May 1977 with 600 people, and then 400 people join him much later. And it was supposed to be this paradise for the people that were going to be there with him. Everybody would work together, get their own food together, that do things in a completely different community, secluded from the world. That's the picture he painted to them, and these people willingly went with him. But it wouldn't be long before things would start to go south. You see, Jim had started to do these drills in anticipation of a potential attack on the whole community, and he will call these white nights. So in the middle of the night, he would go like alert, 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 and then everybody would come and convene at a place they called the Central Pavilion, which was smack dab in the middle of the town, and then go on a bit of a tirade or sermon.
Hell, they've been young ones asleep for an hour. Not that you're going to hold a meeting. We got to hear from what they say. You remember anything I said all night, for Christ's sakes? I know some folk who want to use color as a cop-out. If there wasn't no black person there, they'd say somebody that was white was black.
And then in one of these white nights drills, he would order the people to drink from this liquid that had been prepared, saying it was poison, and people were just crying left and right, thinking they were going to die, only for him to say, oh no, it's just a drill, don't worry. So at that point, he starts to condition them into what was going to happen much later down the road. Increasingly, his behavior was said to have become erratic. He would play sermons of his as people were working in the farms. It became almost unbearable. He started abusing substances, unfortunately, and it was becoming very noticeable with his speech and his delivery of messages, and he almost couldn't walk properly at one point in time. Now, that being said, in 1978 is where things really took a turn for the worse. This is Congressman Leo Ryan, and he was the congressman for the state of California in the US House of Representatives. He had been keeping very close tabs on the incidents going on within Jonestown. He had been very familiar with Jim Jones before his move the previous year, and decided to go down there to Jonestown to see what was going on. Now, on this trip to Guyana, he does not go alone. He has some relatives of some of the people who are within the People's Temple. He also has a camera crew accompanying him from NBC as well as newspaper reporters. So they get there and they are treated to what seems to be a good time per the standards of Jonestown.
Friends to that extent. I'm very glad to be here. This is a congressional inquiry. I think that all of you know that I'm here to find out more about questions that have been raised about your operation here. But I can tell you right now that from the few conversations I've had with some of the folks here already this evening, that whatever the comments are, there are some people here who believe that this is the best thing that ever happened to them in their whole life.
And in all of this, there was one man named Vernon Gosney. Now, Gosney was part of the people that was in Jamestown, and he had wanted to leave, but no one could leave. So he slips a note to a man who he thinks is the governor, but actually is an NBC reporter. And this man gives the note to the congressman, and he is approached and asked if he truly does want to leave. Now, he's not the only one that wants to leave, because there's another woman, Monica Bagby, who wants to leave as well. So tensions start to build within this community. Okay, people want to leave, they don't want to be here anymore. It becomes a bit of a palpable situation. Now, Jones does not resist to the people that want to leave this community that he has built. Now, the story of Vernon Gosney is quite sad. So he had this 4-year-old son, I believe, and as he was leaving, he signs a waiver rights form to have the boy kept in the community as he heads back to the United States, thinking that he might have the chance to go back for him. And unfortunately, that does not happen. Now, as Congressman Ryan is about to leave with this contingency of people as well as people that wanted to leave the People's Temple, he is almost stabbed. But the threat was neutralized very quickly and he seemed to be okay. And they headed to the airstrip where planes were waiting to carry his contingency back to the United States. Jim Jones at this point is at the height of his paranoia. He thinks that, okay, this congressman, once he gets back to the States, is going to report on everything that's going on here. I'm going to be shut down. My life will be over. So he sent some of his men after the congressman and after his contingency, and orders a hit on them. Practically none of them should leave the place alive. So these people get to the airstrip, they are boarding the planes, and suddenly, as one of the planes is about to take off, a red tractor starts to come to obstruct the pathway within which the plane was going to take off, and they start shooting at the plane. At the same time, a man named Larry Layton, who supposedly wanted to leave as well, came on with a firearm and started shooting in the plane that he was in. This plane also had Monica Bagby. She suffered 2 shots to her back. Vernon Gostley was also in this plane, but he was unharmed. And in the midst of this chaos, 4 people lost their lives, one of which was Congressman Leo Ryan. Now, Monica Bagby, despite her injuries, was able to survive. She was treated and she was fine after that. In the meantime, Jones, who is sitting at the camp, gets word from the airstrip that not everybody had been terminated. So now he thinks that his plan is really going to fail, and he calls everybody to this central pavilion. Now, this meeting at the general pavilion is captured in a 44-minute audio recording that becomes known as the death tape.
How very much I tried my best to give you a good life.
Jones starts out presenting that he's tried to provide a better life for all the people there, and they start to applaud him. And then he goes ahead to talk about how his life should not be taken from him, but how he should lay his life down, slowly conditioning the people as to what's to come. And as he's addressing this entire community, some people pull this bucket, fill it with flavor aid, and start to mix it with potassium cyanide. So at that point, it became pretty clear what Jones wanted to happen. 900 cups, a large bucket of flavor aid mixed with cyanide. He wanted everybody to hit the off switch. And this, unfortunately, was to start with almost 300 children that were part of the community. One particular woman, Christine Miller, dissented to their whole idea, but she was shot down very quickly by Jones.
As long as his life is hope. That's my faith.
Well, someday everybody dies. Someplace that hope runs out because everybody dies. I haven't seen anybody yet didn't die. And I like to choose my own kind of death for a change. I'm tired of being tormented to hell. That's what I'm tired of. Tired of it.
Now, for the people that did not want to drink from this concoction, unfortunately, they were forcibly injected with it. Now, Jones's wife Marceline didn't want the children to die, but as all of this was happening, as parents were giving this freely to their children, Marceline couldn't bear it. She also drank from some of it, and she also passed away, unfortunately. Now, Jones himself does not drink from this concoction. Instead, he is found with a bullet wound to his head. Now, in case you're asking how he got the cyanide, he did obtain what was called a jeweler's license so that he could import large amounts of it with the excuse of being able to clean gold with the cyanide. So yeah, he found a loophole into getting it. Thankfully, some people were able to escape. There was a 73-year-old woman, Hyacinth Thrash, who had gone to hide in the dormitory and fell asleep throughout the entire thing. And when she woke up and came out, everybody else had passed away. In total, around 85 people survived the incident, and that was just because they were nowhere close to the situation. Some of them had escaped through the bushes. There was an entire Jonestown basketball team which included 3 of Jim Jones's sons, and they were somewhere else playing a game. They came back, met everybody gone, And those are not flowers in the footage. Those are the bodies of people sprawled all over this place that was supposed to be heaven. And this incident is what was known as the Jonestown Massacre. And this was responsible for the largest loss of American life in a single day up until the 9/11 attacks. And that's about it. If you've been able to make it to this point in the video, congratulations, you have a very strong stomach. This has not been the easiest video for me to make, definitely not the comeback video I wanted to make. I've been spending time away trying to reset, figure a few things out, come back much better. I want to take the channel in a different direction. I've tried everything from reaction videos to vlogs, and that hasn't really been a true self-expression. So yeah, you might see a few random topics, but in the end I just want to make things as interesting as possible for you guys, because what do I know at the end of the day? I'm just a young African man who lives in Ghana, who is trying to understand the world and the way it works. All I can say at the end is, it is what it is. I'll see you in the next one.